Hey all, Pete here. It's September 28th, and I wasn't going to shoot any videos this week. I getting ready to set some steel here this next weekend, and there's only a few more videos I wanted to do before I get out in the field, but I just realized that today is 7 years ago today. We took my dad's ashes up into the country south of me here and spread his ashes at my dad and I's favorite deer hunting spot. He died on August 27th, or I'm sorry, August 28th, 2013. It was the first week of grad school. I went back to grad school when I was 40, and he died the very first week I was back in school, and after a long sustained illness. And so it kind of got me thinking about my dad today. This is a picture of my dad. That's at our favorite deer hunting spot. That's in the early 80s with the mule deer. My dad with the mule deer he shot. My dad taught me a lot of things, and I don't think I can make enough videos to go over all the things that he taught me about the outdoors, but a lot of the things I talk about in my other videos, my dad wasn't a trapper, and he didn't do too much predator calling. He hunted big game and ducks, a lot of birds, but he taught me a lot of really good things, and I was trying to think of one thing I could talk about that my dad taught me. And I realized that I haven't done a video yet about dealing with landowners. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to do a video about that, because my dad taught me a lot about that. My dad taught me a lot about the power of relationships. He was in education at a small rural town in Idaho called Hanson. And he went to work at Hanson School District shortly after he got out of college at Utah State, and that's where I went to grad school. Shortly after he got out of college at Utah State, and he went to work in this little town of Hanson, Idaho, tiny little town, still a little town, and he did, I think, everything you could possibly do in that high school at some point or another. He taught. He was a principal for a long time. He was the athletic director for a long time. He coached football. He coached basketball, girls and boys basketball. He coached track. And I think I was told at one point he was even the cheerleading advisor. So, in this small rural town, he worked there for 27 years before he left and went to another town in Idaho, a little bigger than Hanson, and then he eventually retired. But he knew everybody. And I know that's easy to do in a small town, but I mean, he made it a point to know everybody. And there were, my dad used to ask me when I was a kid, he'd be like, "You want to go run some errands with me?" And at first I was always like, "Yeah, absolutely," because it's time with dad, right? I love my mom too, but shopping with mom, oh my God, it's a fate worse than death, So my dad would say, "You want to go run some errands with me?" And I'd be like, "Sure," But I started to kind of second guess that sometimes, because we could never get to where we were going quickly. Because we'd be driving, he goes, "I'm going to stop by over here and say hi to so-and-so," And I'm just like, why? Why can't we just go? He'd pull into someone's house, go in, say hi, pull into this store, that store, just to say hi to people he knew. And it used to drive me crazy, because it's hours of just stopping to talk to people and say hi to people, and he'd get out, smoke a cigarette, talk to one of his friends, whatever. And then when it comes around time where I get to go hunting with Dad, even before I was old enough to hunt myself, I could go. We'd go out somewhere, and and he'd always stop at this farmhouse, stop at that farmhouse, drop something off to somebody, offer to pick something up for someone else. And it's just like, man, he was always talking to people. Then I get to be old enough to hunt, and we'd go out and we'd go up to these places, and I'd say, where are we going to hunt? He goes, oh, we're going over to hunt so-and-so's property. It's all right. We'd get out there, and he'd get out, and I'd be like, don't get out of the truck. We're almost there. And I'm ready to go shoot a pheasant, but he's got to stop and talk to this farmer forever. He smoked 2 or 3 cigarettes, bullshitting with this guy. And it took me a while to make the connection, but it's the connections with people that are going to give you credibility with landowners. When I was in high school, I could drive my truck out past this little town where my dad worked. And I could park just about anywhere on someone's farmland in my dad's truck. If I was in my dad's truck, I could park it just about anywhere and go hunt without having to ask or say or do anything. Because they saw my dad's truck, they knew who my dad was, and if it was either him or me, it didn't matter, because they knew that my dad's truck was like, it was okay. Whoever was in it, it was fine. Okay? Relationships. My dad built relationships with people. He didn't build them so that he could hunt their property. He built them because that's just kind of how he was. The side effect of that was that it got him some good hunting spots, Again, he didn't build them to get the hunting spots. He built those relationships with people because he was teaching their kids at school. He cared about their kids. He liked people. He was a social critter. He was also difficult sometimes, but anyway, that's a different story. But and so then people liked my dad. My dad knew people, and they'd say, "Hey, what were you up to this?" "Oh, I was out shooting ducks." "Hey, we got a bunch of ducks over on our property. Come shoot them anytime you want. We got pheasants on our property. Come shoot them." Yeah, my dad just relationships. So we're getting to a point in our world where, in a big sense, we don't form relationships with people. We form relationships with our phones and with social media. Those aren't relationships. We don't talk to each other. People don't take the time to just have a conversation. Used to be someone would stop by the house, everybody was excited to see who was there, and now it's just not that way anymore, and I'm just as guilty of it, But I learned from my dad the importance of relationships. And we're getting to a point, too, with hunting and trapping and stuff where more and more land is becoming private. It's becoming private land. I almost exclusively trap on private land. I mean, once in a while, I might be on some BLM land that borders some private land or something, but I like to trap on private land because, one, I don't have to worry as much about my stuff getting stolen. And two, I kind of do that because that's my deal. That's my thing, is I do a lot of predator stuff on private land. And then, my fun trapping for fun that I like really enjoy is the water trapping. And unless I want to drive forever, then I have to trap on private land because those are the closest spots to where I live. To where I live. And so I have to have good relationships with my landowners because, one, for me to do the things I enjoy and do it without a lot of hassle, it's easier to do it on private land. And two, there's a benefit to it, it benefits me as much as it does them. You want to know the power of these relationships? Where I trap today, one of the places I trap coyote, one of the areas I trap coyotes is out past this little town of Hanson, where my dad worked. And the people that own the land that I trap on, my parents taught in high school. They know me still. I don't get to see them in person very often, but it's funny, once in a while I'll run into one of them and they'll be like, 2 years ago, I ran into a guy out there and I was right on the border of his land, and he goes, "Are you Pete Espel?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, I haven't seen you since you were this tall. I said, yeah, and he goes, boy, your parents taught me in school. And I said, yeah. And I said, I remember your name. And he says, what are you doing out here? I said, I'm trapping for so-and-so, who also my parents taught in school. And he goes, well, here, all this land over here to the west is my land. It goes for about a mile, and he goes, you can trap anywhere on that you want. That's the value of relationships. You want to have access to private land, you got to build a relationship with people. They got to trust you. They might tell you no the first time. Build the relationship. Some of my landowners, they know they can call me, my rancher landowners. They can call me. They know I check traps on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and they know they could call me on Monday or Tuesday and say, hey, can you stop and grab something for me and bring it to me tomorrow when you're out here? I need a fuse for my fence, or I need, a gasket for this, or my wife wants to cook this and she doesn't have it and she doesn't want to run to town. Can you bring it out tomorrow? I'm like, absolutely. Most of the time I don't ask for reimbursement, So what if I'm out $20? I've got 2,000 acres from this guy to trap, They got to move cows and they're shorthanded. Can you help us? Yeah, sure. Relationships. Your relationships with your landowners are the most important investment you can make. They're more important than your equipment investment. They're more important than anything else that you'll do if you're a trapper. Because once you have that relationship with them, they're not going to let anybody else on their land to trap. They're going to call you, and they're going to tell their friends. And they're going to be like, oh, you got a problem with coyotes getting your calves? Oh, I got this guy. He traps my land every year. He's a great guy. He takes good care of my land, blah, blah, blah. Here's his card. Here's his name. Here's his number. First time you violate that trust with that landowner, it's almost impossible to get it back. And I've made that mistake once. It wasn't even totally my fault, but I didn't do anything wrong, but what I did do, I knew better. And that property is no longer on my route. So my dad taught me about the value of relationships. Incidentally, it's also a core value of social work. I got my degree as a social worker, so I work as a counselor. But the value of relationships, very powerful. Okay? Put the time in to build relationships with landowners, and you'll always have places to trap. So on this day, September 28th, I remember my dad, and I remember some of the things he taught me. I encourage you to build strong relationships with the farmers and ranchers and landowners in your area, and it'll make a difference for your trapping. That's all I got. Remember, God is great, guns are good, freedoms are precious, and pray for our nation during this time going into the elections, because our nation needs it. See you next time.